this meeting, the green light, or the ACPT meeting of October 14th. And as always, we go around the table, we introduce ourselves and who we represent. Today we have some extra people at the table. We have, when we did our MPO meeting, there were some people that were interested in hearing more detail about the financials, which are going to be done today, and we invited them to come. And we have with us the chairman of the Civic Committee and the Business Committee, and we'll talk about that later on. So with that, Mr. Crawford, we'll start with you and go around the table. Thank you.
I'm Michael Crawford, and I'm the interim executive director for the Pinellas Planning Council.
Ronnie Duncan, Chair, T-Barda. Bob Clifford, T-Barda.
Sarah Ward, field staff. Doreen DeGalibos, third council representing Pinellas County Council.
Susan Lightballow, Pinellas County Commissioner representing PSTA.
Julie Wojciechowski, Vice Mayor, City of Dunedin, PSTA board member and representing NPA.
Ken Welch, County Commissioner representing PSTA, and Ronnie Duncan.
Harry Frazier, Commissioner with the City of Largo, Chairman and representing MPO.
I'm Karen Seal, I'm a Pinellas County Commissioner, and I'm representing T-Barda.
I'm Jim Kennedy, City of St. Petersburg City Council, and current chair of the Pinellas Planning Council.
Cassandra Borchers, PSTA staff.
Alan Zimmett, PSTA General Counsel.
Brad Miller, CEO of PSTA.
Dave Eggers, Mayor of City of Dunedin and MPO member.
Stacy Blake, convener with the Green Light Civic Committee and member of the Green Light Council.
Rob Bannister with Ernst & Young, advisor to PSTA.
Great, thank you. We'll take the gentleman behind you because I don't have a table.
Nick Sirianni, also with Ernst & Young.
Great, thank you. Mr. Danner, has anyone heard will he be attending a little late? Well, if he does, that's when he says I think he's T-Barda. Yeah. And this is a public meeting. We will be voting on none of the agenda items. However, if there's anyone in the public that wishes to speak, we have yellow cards. Do we have anyone that's filled out? Is there anyone that wishes to speak? Seeing none, I'll close that portion of the meeting and we will move into the approval of the minutes. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I have no minutes to approve. So we will take that piece of the pie to next month and we will approve October's and September's. Now we're ready for our presentations, and it's pretty lengthy and involved, intense, and I know we were given no backup material, but I'm sure by the time this is over with, we will receive some. Is that correct, Mr. Miller?
Yes, Chair Crozier and the other members, you're correct. I apologize for the lack of minutes, but the other item did not have any attachments that were sent out with the original packet. The ACPT members should have received this morning in the last maybe 2 hours the copy of the Ernst & Young presentation, or the presentation for agenda item number 3 as an email attachment, and that is also available on the PSTA website. I just checked the presentation, so you can download it off the PSTA website. And then agenda item number 4, the attachment is mainly this book that's at your table. This book, and there's no attachment for number 5.
Okay. Well, having us, yes.
Got my tablet this morning, so if I could get a hard copy.
I don't see my sister Rachel, so I'm hoping that that's what she is. I don't know what she
yes.
is.
For the financial plan part.
Yeah.
The email just came out at 12:52.
At 12:52? Okay, well then I guess I'm not really,
Don't worry about it.
I don't feel bad then.
Yes.
Can we have one copy though to follow along? Do we have anything?
Is it just
Yeah,
a
well,
PowerPoint?
Leslie, you want to go make sure that she makes
Oh, it's
copies
just a
of
PowerPoint, it's
that
not
Yes.
Just
presentation.
open it up, it looks like it's
charts and numbers?
And,
Okay.
all right, I'd like to continue on, and as I said before, we will be given the information, and we will be able to ask questions. And we are not voting on it until November. So that gives everyone the opportunity to take it with you, open it up, look at it in further detail. With that, I would like, I see on the agenda is, let's have some further discussion, Alan, on the Sunshine Law. Do you want to update us on anything?
Yes, the last meeting, we had an initial discussion about the allegations that prior meetings of the ACPT were not properly noticed. I indicated to the committee that I was looking into the notices that were posted and have been able to do that, and take a few minutes to report back to you what we found. And I have to remind everybody, there was a period of time that the consultant for FDOT, Jacobs, was kind of really organizing these meetings and running the meetings. And they did, the way they were noticing these meetings was by posting the agendas with the information about where the meeting was, the location, the date, time, on the website. That was, they were, I don't know the technology, the correct technical term, but they were in control of that website. Webmaster, or whatever the terminology is. And so they were posting the agendas. My understanding is they had received a legal opinion that that was acceptable notice. The statute just calls for reasonable notice. And the agendas did indicate that, like I said, the date, time, location of the meetings. When PSTA took over, and there was, the transition wasn't necessarily a cut and dry date when PSTA took over, but when PSTA took over, they started to actually post the meeting notices on the location downstairs where PSTA normally notices meetings, and posted a document that was actually termed meeting notice, and so it had a little bit different format, but had the same information in terms of the time, date, location of the meetings. The only thing when the agendas were being done, and in some of the meeting notices, the only information that was not included was there is a requirement in the Sunshine Law that there be included certain language about if somebody wants to appeal a decision of that board, they have to obtain their own recording of or transcript of what occurred in order to be able to appeal that any decision that's made by that board. That is in a separate part of the Sunshine Law. There is no penalty associated in the statute with a violation or failure to include that language. And this committee doesn't make any decisions that are appealable to anybody. This is as an advisory board or committee, you are providing advice to now, I guess, 4 or 5 different boards, some of which may make a decision which could possibly be appealable at a future time. But, so our opinion is that the fact that the agendas were posted with the date, time, location of the meetings on the agenda. I have the dates when they were posted before every meeting. They were posted reasonably before your meetings occurred. It's our opinion that those notices met the requirement in the statute for reasonable notice of the meetings. I don't know if you need any further discussion of that, but if anybody has any questions, we can discuss that further.
Are there any questions from the Commissioner Kuchowski?
So all the meetings that the ACPT have held, even when it went from the engineering firm or consultant, and then when it went to PSTA, we're good?
Right, they're just done it in a different way. Jacobs did it online through the agenda. PSTA typically prepared a separate document called a meeting notice that was posted downstairs and is now also being posted on the website.
How about ours, though, the PSTA meetings, the PSTA posted, we're good on that as well?
Yes.
So no corrections are required, or?
In our opinion, now, and I know we had this discussion, there is a way to correct or cure any alleged claim of violation of a meeting notice requirement, and that is by basically holding a meeting and which is properly noticed, in which you would do a full, pretty much a full review of whatever was discussed and voted on at any meeting that allegedly was not noticed. Similar to what we did with the minutes that were approved at the August meeting. And that was reconsidered and voted on again at the September meeting. You would have to do that with each of the items from any of the meetings where if we thought that there was a violation. Certainly you could do that if you wished, if the committee wished to. You would have to have a meaningful discussion of all the items that you voted on and the presentations that were made to you at any of those meetings where there's an alleged violation.
What is your recommendation?
Our recommendation is that the notices were reasonable to meet the requirements of the statute and that it would not be necessary to do that.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we will move on to item number 2, which is the work plan and Mr. Fund. You all will just pass out everything, so hopefully that you follow it.
We're working on getting more copies made.
Okay.
Thank you. Cassandra Borchers, Chief Development Officer at PSTA. This is the work plan that we have used throughout this year to make sure that we are on schedule for this project. As you can see, our discussion today will be the financial plan and the phasing. You'll see presentations on those, as well as the development concepts or the land use side of what we've been doing. We've also been very active in engaging our partners in the discussion and finishing the first round of development for that financial model. The slight change in the financial model or that detailed financial plan would be that the PSTA board did not approve that task work order until the end of August, and so our consultants have been very quickly collecting a lot of information from staff, past projects, and I know that from the work that you'll see them showing you today, you see that they have been very good at doing a lot of really high quality work very, very quickly. So today we will have these discussions but really save the decision part for the beginning of November. Your next meeting is November 4th because the regularly scheduled meeting is November 11th, and that is Veterans Day. So please make sure that you have November 4th, 1 o'clock on your calendars. That will be our decision day. And with that, unless there's any questions about the overall work plan, I think we are maintaining our schedule, doing a lot of really detailed work right now, but on time.
Any questions regarding the schedule?
Quick update. Spoke a little bit with Brad this morning. There was a question from our county administration and county attorney about the timing of the December 3rd work session and the December 10th meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. These are legal things like specifying it's a full penny versus a half penny, some issues regarding validation, which I guess attorneys know what I'm talking about when I say validation, and some other issues. So what we're going to do is on October 29th, I'll put that on the Board of County Commissioners work session so we can talk about it as a commission. We've talked about it as, members of the MPO or ACPT or CPC, but we need to have that refresher as a county commission to make sure we've got everything lined up. So December 3rd and 10th still look good, but we've got some issues we need to make sure we clear up.
All right, thank you for that update and information. Any other questions on the schedule? Having seen none, thank you. We will move on to item number 3, which is what I think we've all been waiting for. All of us keep saying, finance, finance. Well, it's finally here. And Cassandra, I'll let you do the introductions, and in the order that we're going to take it, there's 3 bullets underneath. We will do the review of the capital first, then they are going to talk about the overview, and then third will be the phasing plan. Am I correct?
Yes.
That's what Brad said, okay. And if you feel that we need first and then want to open it to questions, we can do that, or if we want to do 1 and 2 and then open it. We don't want to introduce the interrupt the presentation, but when that piece is over, we can take some questions at that point, so you don't have to remember. Is that okay with you and the presenters?
That's fine, at the pleasure of the committee, really.
Okay.
You know, I think we're all pretty knee-deep in this, so we're able to shift gears pretty quickly from questions back to the presentation.
Okay, great, thank you.
So, at the pleasure of the committee. As part of the engaging our consultant, HNTB, out of our general services contract with PSTA, we have not only had HNTB been working on revising some of the capital cost, ensuring that those numbers that were done earlier are still valid, but we're also taking that one step further and looking at moving it into a financial plan and year of expenditure dollars. So today's presentations will be we should see where we've been with that work and how it's resulted also in the description of the phasing plan. Just for a little spoiler, everything that we have talked about in terms of the green light plan, we have put into the financial plan. There were no cuts to the plans that we've shown you. And so we have managed to make sure that between the cash revenues and the phasing, we're able to do everything that is on the green light plan map that you've seen in the past. So I won't, you can save that question for another probing question. We're going to have presentations by HNTB and then by Ernst & Young. HNTB will talk about the work that they've done in validating the capital cost numbers, followed by how those numbers were incorporated into the financial plan. So I'll let Ben Walker from HNTB give his presentation.
Good afternoon, Ben Walker from HNTB. When we approached the review of the capital cost elements, what we really were looking at is specific to the light rail component for capital cost. And really, the capital costs involve everything that can or would be built as a part of this system. We really got into the details that were generated as a part of the Jacobs alternatives analysis development. And this specifically looked at track costs, and track costs, whether they're at grade, elevated in areas where they're going over existing facilities, or in-street running light rail transit, because those have very unique and special design elements associated with them, as well as looking at the stations that were planned as a part of the light rail system, maintenance facilities that would be needed to support the ongoing maintenance of light rail vehicles, as well as the yard track associated with storing those vehicles overnight, supporting roadways, because there is planned to be some small roadway reconstruction associated with the in-street running light rail system, as well as systems planning. And that really involves the juice of light rail transit, the signal systems for operating, the power associated in both, whether it's single track or double track, communications, and how the system itself will operate and communicate both with the driver and other vehicles, fare collection, of course the transit vehicles themselves, and professional services that would be associated with developing the light rail system, that design, right-of-way, construction, and construction engineering inspection. We took a very conservative approach because all of the line items associated with developing a capital cost estimate have a very unique feature to them. Our approach was at this stage in the project's development, because we are at the early stages with the planning, have not gone through the NEPA process yet or final design. We thought it would be very appropriate to take a very conservative approach with that, to that regard, we looked at the contingency levels, not only the unit costs associated with each element, as previously mentioned with the tracks and the signals, but also the contingencies that could be applied to each of these unit costs. And depending on the volatility of these estimates, we reflected different contingency amounts. For example, I just put some of the top three really items that had the most potential fluctuation with the capital cost element, such as the right-of-way, where we assumed a 40% contingency amount for right-of-way purchasing. At-grade track of 25%, because that has several unique unknowns associated with it, like utilities and utility impacts. The signal systems, and again, the signal systems can be driven by what type of operation and operating mechanisms you assume, whether it's line of sight controlled or more technology and GIS-based control systems. And those were really the three biggest cost drivers in terms of allocated line item contingencies for your capital cost elements. Then you have the unallocated contingency of when you looked at everything within the system, you have the program and a program type contingency, and that's where you see your unallocated contingency amount. Looking back at the Jacobs AA, they estimated a range of $1.5 to $1.7 billion for the capital cost. Bringing everything to a constant year dollar of 2011, we estimated the capital cost for light rail to be $1.68 billion. Of that amount, 66% of it is with unit cost, base cost for these individual line items. Again, with your allocated contingencies, those line item contingencies of about 21%, and the unallocated of about 12%. So all total of that 1.68, 33% of that is built into contingency. So at this stage in the game, you have a significant contingency amount, but that's very appropriate. So as you move on to final design, that contingency is expected to narrow down as you get more refined and closer to actual construction. So how does this compare? The graph that you see before you is what was shown as a part of the Pinellas AA with both the low and the high range for the Pinellas light rail system. We've updated these costs and as well as included new systems costs to see how it still compares with the latest from the FTA fact sheets. And as you can see, and we've also taken into account the financial cost in working with Ernst & Young as a part of this study, the financial costs associated with the system comparison. Before the previous slide showed a range of, for the Pinellas AA of $64 to $72 million. This did not assume that financial component because that was unknown at the time of how this project could be financed. The increase to $80.3 million is right in line with that financial component on a year or a per mile cost basis. So the overall capital cost of 72 is right in line with what was proposed. This brings it up to speed with the financial component associated with light rail transit. And as you can see, it also compares very, very well to similar systems that are either have recently been constructed or are planned to come online within the next couple of years. That really concludes my part of the presentation. If we want to go right into Nick, your part.
Yes, we have one question before you come in again.
So what I want to know, if you will, is your job was to look at the AA that was done in 2011 dollars, and you were to double check all of the numbers that they used for construction, for the capital cost to build the complete light rail system, and just tell us whether it is in line or not, right? That was
Correct.
basically
Whether
the
it's in line
instruction you were given.
in some areas, some unit costs, we thought Jacobs might have been overestimating or underestimating, and we adjusted those accordingly. Jacobs had assumed a 10% unallocated contingency. At this stage in the process, we thought a 12% program contingency would be more appropriate, so we adjusted that up to 12%. And similar with every other unit cost, we looked at today's dollars and 2011 dollars, whether that's what we see the industry still doing.
So And I'm only asking this because you had a very short presentation, but I think I know what you were trying to tell us, and I just want to make sure I'm correct in my thinking that everybody else understands as well. So, you went through line by line, track by track, all of that,
Correct.
and applied your expertise to what it would cost in today and future dollars. And what you're saying is that what Jacob said it would be between 1.5 and 1.7 billion, and you're saying 1.68, we're within the range. And you've made some recommendations for a few adjustments, but we still fall within a reasonable guide of what Jacobs had done. You just adjusted it a little bit.
Correct. And then we fed our 1.68 billion to Ernst & Young to develop that financial plan.
So then they're using your revised cost estimates, and that's what they're going to then present and how to operate it and get it done.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Just one minute. Thanks, Ben. So if we were in 2013 going to build this project, would we use the 1.68 billion as a?
The 1.68 was in 2011 dollars because we want to maintain that consistency, so it just, you would inflate that to 2013 dollars.
And what would that be?
I think that's part of the next presentation, not to talk about what it would be in 2013,
Right.
but what it's going to be in terms of year of expenditure dollars.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor,
Yeah, real quick, in all this comparisons to the city, you've normalized those with similar escalations? I think if
Correct. If a system was built in 2004, we took that final cost, escalated it to 2011, so every system that was compared had a constant $2011.
And those were all consistent between the cities. And what numbers did you use there? Are they somewhere in here? The escalators? To bring
No,
it-
we didn't put the escalators, in fact, but they're developed from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's move on.
Thank you. I'm Nick Sirianni with Ernst & Young. And as Cassandra mentioned earlier, we were brought in to look at actually a couple of things. Look at the financial feasibility at this stage of project development of the overall program, including the bus service expansion as well as the proposed light rail system. Our scope is two phases. The first phase, which we're in the middle of right now, was to develop a PSTA-specific financial model that allowed us to look at the entire program over a span of 35 years or more. Once we conclude that phase, then we will also take a look at whether or not the application of a public-private partnership approach to the LRT system would have any merit. You just heard from HNTB. They were scoped to do the cost review on the LRT system. And then there's an additional consulting firm, TMD, who's doing similar work relative to the overall bus program expansion. Our group within Ernst & Young, we were formerly Jeffrey Parker and Associates. We were acquired by Ernst & Young a little over a year ago. We currently are advising clients, principally public sector clients, on over $18 billion in a variety of infrastructure projects around the country. Our particular expertise includes highways, transit, as well as major intermodal centers. We've been the advisors to Florida DOT on the Miami Intermodal Center, and we're currently involved in a similar scale project with Georgia DOT in downtown Atlanta. We also have incorporated innovative finance strategies into many of our projects. like Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act loans, federal loans, TIFIA loans as they're referred to, state infrastructure bank loans, and these all allow you to optimize debt, which will be required in this case, to a level beyond just traditional tax-exempt debt. We have a lot of experience with the FTA New Starts process. Some of our most recent successes include the Sunrail project over in Orlando. We just recently helped the Charlotte transit system qualify for New Starts funding on the last second piece, I guess, of their light rail system. And then, as I mentioned before, we do have P3 experience. We were the financial advisors to FDOT and helped close 2 active P3 projects here in the state of Florida, the Port of Miami Tunnel, as well as the I-595 Express Lanes project in Fort Lauderdale. Currently, our transit clients include the District of Columbia Department of Transportation on their streetcar system. That's a 37-mile system that they're developing currently. The Charlotte transit system, CATS, I mentioned that previously. We're involved in multiple Florida transit projects. Sunrail, I mentioned earlier. In Southeast Florida, we're helping the department look at alternative ways of introducing passenger rail service on the FEC Railroad Corridor. And we were just selected to look on behalf of the Miami-Dade MPO financial feasibility of the Baylink light rail system, which is planned to connect downtown Miami to Miami Beach. What we did is we took what was referred to as a conceptual financial plan that was done in 2011, and we built upon that by developing a PSTA-specific financial model. And what we have the ability to do now with the financial model is we can look at annual cash flows, comparing costs as well as revenues. We can look at cost in terms of year of expenditure dollars to account for inflationary impacts, as well as we can look at different growth rates in sales tax revenue growth that's projected right now. We had an opportunity to look at some of the previous funding assumptions, and we've updated a few of those based on our own judgment of the likelihood that those funding sources would materialize for this project. And we can pay attention to things like debt service coverage, because we are proposing that from the sales tax revenues, you would want to issue debt to support at least part of the local share of project costs. And we have the ability to stress the financial model, do sensitivity testing, which is helpful for making decisions down the road if some of the base case assumptions should change. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rob Bannister.
The next 2 slides are meant to help you see the relative share of the bus program improvements to the LRT system. So we'll look at both the capital side as well as the operating slide. In this chart, the green bars are representing the bus program improvements, both the initial capital investment as well as ongoing renewal and replacement costs. Whereas the black bars represent the LRT investment. And there's a shaded bar out here representing mid-life vehicle overhauls. So we were looking about 13 years down the road having to do some significant capital investment on the LRT system. And what this chart shows is that for the LRT, on the capital side, the initial capital investment is quite large. That represents the $1.68 billion in 2011 dollars, but this is in year of expenditure dollars, which we'll go into more detail momentarily. The spend out of that $1.68 billion in 2011 we're assuming occurs over a 7-year period. So the final year of the cash payouts would be in 2024 if we were to begin in 2018. And the operations of the light rail system we're assuming would also begin in 2024. About every 12 years or so, you see this recurring pattern of large expenditures related to the replacement of buses, which has about a 12-year life. If we look here, this is the same, represents the same cost that we were looking at earlier, except that we've attempted to smooth out the capital cost that would be borne by PSTA as opposed to funds from federal and state partners. So these initial capital outlays go down significantly, but then you have a larger ongoing cost related to debt service. And then the bus program we're assuming is paid for on a pay-as-you-go basis, no financing on the bus side. Now this slide provides a very different picture in that the gray bars on the bottom represent the cost to operate and maintain the bus system, which you can see are a good bit larger than the cost to operate and maintain the light rail system, which are the black bars. Again, you'll see in 2024 is when we're assuming that operations commence on the LRT system. So to summarize the capital slides, you saw, the capital cost slides, you saw a much larger investment for the light rail system, smaller for bus. On the operating side, that picture is reversed to an extent. The next few slides, we're going to talk about some of our key assumptions so you understand how we generated our projections. I mentioned earlier we have a 7-year payout period for the capital costs, and the last year of that period is when we assume the LRT commences operations in 2024. My colleague from HNTB mentioned the $1.68 billion costs in 2011 dollars, and to bring that to year of expenditure dollars, I'll just skip to this line here, we assumed capital cost escalation rates ranging from 2.9% to 4%. Those are based on the Florida Department of Transportation's work program instructions for cost escalation. They're also consistent with the range that we've seen on other New Starts projects. On the O&M costs, we're assuming growth of 3.25% per year after an initial period of slightly higher escalation. On the revenue side, let me start here with the sales tax. We're assuming that if a referendum were successful in November 2014, that the collections wouldn't actually start until January 1st, 2016. We're assuming that the ad valorem revenue would end in September 30th, the end of fiscal year 2015. But if the sales tax collections didn't start till the beginning of calendar year 2016, you would lose that last quarter of calendar year 2015 of ad valorem revenue, but it would be before your sales tax collections start. We further assume that there would be about a 2-month delay between the time that the collections start and when that cash would be received by PSTA to help fund their operations. So we're basically building in a 5-month period when PSTA would be funding their ongoing operations through reserves. So we're looking to make sure that there's sufficient cash to cover that gap. Also on the revenue side, as many of you are aware that work in transit, the Federal Transit Administration, in addition to having a capital grants program, also provides funds during the operating period of systems to help them with ongoing capital renewal and replacement costs. It's a significant source of funding for a transit agency. So we were looking at what's happening on the federal level now in terms of funding of the FTA and seeing that for the last few years there has not been much growth in those federal formula fund programs. So we took the assumption that there would continue to be no growth in the appropriations to those programs until 2020, at which point we assume that the rate would increase to 2%, which is about half of what it's been, or if we look over a longer historical period. It's conservative in that regard. The sales tax is a significant assumption, so we have a slide just on that. If you look here, you'll see that from 1992 to 2012, so approximately a 20-year period, the sales tax growth rate has varied. Some years it's increased as high as 10%, other years much lower. In the recessions in 2002, Great Recession, it's averaged about 3.1%. What we're assuming in our projections is that it averages 3% per year, so just below what the average has been. We've also made the following assumptions regarding reserve funds. Our recommendation is that the PSTA have a revenue stabilization reserve fund, and the way that would work is that if the financial projections and the budgeting of PSTA is based on a 3% average annual growth rate, we know that there will be years when the sales tax will outperform 3% and other years when it will underperform. So we're recommending that there be a revenue stabilization reserve fund to which PSTA would deposit excess sales tax revenues in years when the growth is stronger than 3%, and then it would be able to withdraw from that fund in years when it's below 3% to provide some stability to the trans-agency's funding. From the operating expense reserve fund, we're assuming that it would equal 3 months of operating expenses for both the light rail system and the bus program. And that because we're assuming that the PSTA would fund its share of the LRT system through debt, that there would be a debt service reserve fund for the lenders, and that would be established at the time that the debt was issued. This chart summarizes in numbers what we've talked about earlier. I'll start with the LRT because I think that's where everyone's eyes will go first. We're assuming that we would have funding partners on the federal and state level. From the federal side, we looked at New Start's program covering just over a third of the capital costs. In the past, it has been as high as 80% of capital costs. More recently, there's been, it's more common that the cap is set at half of the capital costs. And we're assuming to be conservative that it would be even lower than that, given what's happening on the federal level. The state New Start's transit program, they will fund as much as half of the non-federal share. So if we look at, say, 64% as the non-federal share, so 32% could be state funded. We thought it would be a little aggressive to just look at that from the percentages, because if you look at the dollar amounts that are in the state's New Start's transit program, we felt that given what they're projecting the funding levels to be for that program over the next 5 years, we thought it would be more realistic to assume a lower level of $300 million, which would leave a local share of about $1.36 billion to be funded from local funds. And how we came up with that number, this $2.3 billion represents the $1.68 billion in 2011 dollars, but we had to escalate that out as far as 2024, which is the last year of payout. That goes to your question. And then in addition to the capital costs, there are our financing costs, principally your interest during the construction period, which is 6 years, and then the initial deposits to the reserve funds I mentioned, some debt issuance costs. So that would bring it up to about $2.6 billion. The BRT program, we put this here because it is a significant expenditure. It's almost $150 million. We assume the state would fund a quarter of that, and the PSTA would need to fund the remaining share, which we're assuming in this finance financial model as pay-as-you-go funds. This chart here is to help you understand how the costs of the LRT program, which is represented in black below, and the cost of the bus program, which is in gray, relate to the sales tax revenue. So let me just talk a little bit about how we constructed this graph, because I think it can give you a lot of information. So the black area here, representing the light rail system, that is the net cost of the program. So it includes your capital costs as well as your operations and maintenance costs, your renewal and replacement costs, net of grant money that's received from the federal and state funding partners, and system-generated funds such as fare box revenue or ancillary revenue. So this is the net cost. The gray area, and these are not overlapping, these are cumulative. The gray area represents the bus program, and it has a different profile because, remember here, we're assuming that the PSTA share is being spread out and smoothed over time through debt. So you have level debt service payments. Whereas on the bus program, we're assuming that it's funded on a pay-as-you-go basis. So you see an initial large expenditure as the bus program is expanded, and every 12 years or so you get this peak related to replacements of the buses every 12 years or so. Now what this dark black line represents is your tax revenue. And one other thing I should mention is that these net costs assume the cost of depositing money into that operating expense reserve I mentioned. So you still have a 3-month operating expense reserve separate, but this represents the cost of funding that reserve. So here we have sales tax revenue and initially the ad valorem tax revenue, and we didn't allocate that to the bus or the LRT program, but we just wanted to show that this is your revenue curve. So in some years you're going to have costs that are below your revenue curve. In other years, you would have costs that exceed your revenue curve. And if we look at this chart, this shows your cash balance. So the black line represents the cash balance that rolls forward each year. It's not a net cash flow. Your net cash flow, you would see you have a positive net cash flow, for example, here, because your expenses are below your revenues, so you have a positive cash flow. It would be negative in years where the peaks are above the line. And here, you'll see they correspond to a growing cash balance when you have that positive cash flow. And the point of this chart is to show you that your cash balance does not fall below zero. It stays positive. But because of the lumpiness of the expenditures in the program, you're going to have some years where you're building up some cash reserves. Some might think of it as a capital maintenance fund or capital renewal replacement fund, but you need to reserve some money so that in these years when you have the large expenditures, in here, you're not falling below zero. And a further area of analysis for Ernst & Young will be to see, to what extent we might want to smooth this out, see if you can optimize this a little better. The dotted black line is just for comparative purposes. That's your operating balance, which would be all your operating revenues minus your operating costs. And you can see that's always positive, mainly because we have the sales tax revenue we're putting in the operating program. So you've always got strong positive operating balance, but that's used to help fund your capital program. And the whole net result of that is this black line. So I went into really into the weeds there, which will appeal to some of you. Others, it probably does not. But we can go back to these charts when people have questions. You want to finish up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, even though the picture you just looked at looked reasonably good financially in terms of the feasibility of the program, we still have to be, I guess, mindful of what the risks are going forward. And, it can be anything from higher inflation, another recession, which would create a revenue shock like we saw in the historical sales tax chart, a slower growth rate in sales tax collections versus growth in O&M costs, for example, over the long term. As the project advances into future phases of work, more engineering will be done, and we could find that we're realizing higher capital costs than what we're currently looking at. So, we came up with this list that's both specific to PSTA as well as just some things that we've seen applied on other projects that we've been involved in to kind of mitigate those risks. And on the bus program, not to necessarily get hung up on stations, but obviously look for ways to reduce the cost without impacting service. Look to alternative technologies potentially in the types of vehicles that are acquired for the service expansion. And then you always have the opportunity to refine how quickly you ramp up to expand the bus service. On the LRT system, we've seen on other projects where private landowners are willing to donate right-of-way to the project, which would allow you to reduce the right-of-way cost component of the overall capital cost. Also, you could phase the LRT stations from what you need initially to begin operations, a core system, versus what's referred to as infill stations, which could come online a little later. In other cities, local jurisdictions that are on the receiving end of a station have been willing to provide funding contributions either to build the station or to help with the ongoing station maintenance, which typically aren't very large. But the fact that you have 16 stations, every little bit helps, so to speak. So that's another alternative that we may have to look at later on. Could be that on the state side, anyway, we were intentionally conservative about assuming how much state dollars we could get for the LRT capital program. So we'd want to kind of check back with them periodically to see just how large the program is on a statewide basis, because it's fed through dock stamp revenue. And as that revenue stream grows, potentially that program could grow proportionately. Obviously, as the project advances, the cost will be reviewed both on the capital cost as well as the O&M cost. We've looked initially at some phasing options on the LRT so that the entire capital cost wouldn't necessarily have to be funded all at once. But really what we found is that it really didn't make a material difference in the financial feasibility. But again, that's something else that we can test later on. And then I mentioned earlier that we will look at whether or not a P3 procurement structure has any application to the LRT, because that can help reduce your long-term life cycle cost, make that cost growth curve more predictable. The last thing we're going to do, we're in the process of doing it now, is optimize how the debt is structured, both the debt, the sales tax revenue debt, as well as we have incorporated the TIFIA loan concept into the overall program, and with that program, you have a lot of flexibility in how you structure the repayment. So there's some things we can do there actually in the short term. Going forward, this is a snapshot as of today. If we took a look 6 months from now, those graphs might look different. So I think Brad, his intention is to continue to monitor the financial feasibility as we go forward into time. Certainly, long-term O&M cost growth, that has to be managed very carefully, because if the disparity potentially between cost growth and revenue growth gets too wide, it's very difficult to recover from that with a compounding effect. And then at some point we'll be recommending certain financial policies that the PSTA board we'll probably want to adopt, like the establishment of some of these reserve accounts that Rob mentioned and described earlier. That kind of wraps up our part, so we'll be happy to take questions.
Any questions yet? Already as part of the presentation? Thanks, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Not really a question, but a clarifying comment. I think I heard you very strongly say that we shouldn't hold these numbers too closely to our chest. That's a moving target. And my fear is that those of us in elected office, who are still sitting here at that time, will go, oh, but look, it said right here that it was going to cost this much. And now it's some different number. And I just think we all need to be cognizant of that. There's no way today that you can guarantee what something's going to cost in 5 years or 10 years. And if you
And
get
it's, if I may, I mean, it's not just on the cost side, it's on the revenue side.
operating, well, absolutely.
I mean, it all impacts the financial feasibility. And these are things that none of us in this room can control, so.
Well, I'm very appreciative of the work that you did, and it gives me greater security in what was provided. I think the main goal of what we were trying to see was three things, was to validate the past costs for the Jacob reports. We were trying to factor in what inflation and other factors would come into play, not just on the revenue side, but on the cost side. And then, finally to see it over time to make sure that we are going to be in a sufficiently, what I would consider really a safe place. And the reason why I feel safe about it is because I think you've used very good inflation and cost figures in this report. So I do have just one question for clarification for me. The capital cost that you had of $2.3 billion, did you say that that was inflated all the way out to 2024?
Up until, over the entire construction period.
Okay,
which
so
would end in-
each year you took whatever you thought we would be constructing and added an inflation for 2018, 2019, 2020. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that that was how that was done.
Exactly.
So, again, to think that you have run these cost figures out to 2024 shows a very conservative approach to this modeling. So, thank you.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Thank you. I want to thank you for your presentation. And kind of trying to boil it all down with the understanding of there could be a lot of different adjustments in the economy in the next 10 years. At this point in time, this seems like a pretty feasible plan.
Yes.
Are there things in here that you think are less feasible that you think we need to look at again? Or does it feel like it's on a good, solid foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the whole, based on this snapshot, the program looks reasonably feasible. One of the big unknowns, for example, would be the FTA New Starts contribution. That's almost $1 billion, even though it's only a third of the total cost. So it's conservative in the fact that we're not looking for 50%, but yet it's still a big number. And by the time we're ready to actually apply for that source, who knows what the size of the program is going to be or what the national competition for those dollars will be. So that's a fairly significant single issue, if you will. But again, I think it's the potential disparity in growth rates between revenue and cost. If that somehow becomes too disparate, then we got a problem over the long haul.
And that's something we'll monitor.
Yes.
As we go by, and there's nothing we could do at this point in time to make that assumption more secure.
Yeah, and I mean, so we were, we were intentionally conservative in projecting sales tax revenue growth. We didn't want to take any liberties looking back over the last 10 or 20 years. We felt like we were about where we should be. On cost growth, it'll be a new day because it's a bigger program. You have LRT, so that's something that PSTA management will have to focus on going forward.
A little more specific question on the Revenue Stabilization Reserve Fund. Is there a percent of operating costs that you would anticipate being in that type of reserve fund?
Well, our recommendation would be that that fund would be created based on just the sales tax growth, and we would be looking to, so let me just recap what that fund was. Thank you. We would, if we assume that 3% of the sales tax revenue grows at 3% a year, let's say in 1 year it's 5 or 6% a year, rather than PSTA looking at that as a bonus, they instead would sock that extra money away into this reserve fund because inevitably sales tax is going to come in below 3%, perhaps even a negative, below what it was the prior year. And then they would look to that fund to withdraw money. And we're going to, our next phase of analysis, we'll be doing sensitivity analysis to see if, for example, we replicate, instead of assumed 3% growth year in and year out, we instead assumed a revenue growth curve that looked like these columns. And let's say we started the columns so that maybe this is 2015, what we saw maybe 6-7% growth in 1993. Let's say in 2016, first year of collections, that the growth were above that. Next year was even higher. Next year was still above. And for several years, it's above. All this money gets swept into the reserve fund that's going to save the day when you get out here. Our sensitivity analysis is going to look and see, well, what if 2016 looks like this before the reserves have actually built up? Or what if it looks like this? What are the mitigation measures that PSTA would have at its disposal to handle that, to get through such a period where you don't have a revenue reserve fund built up yet to handle that? That's on the revenue side. Your question goes more to the operating side, if I understood correctly?
Well, I'm used to seeing economic stability funds as being a percentage of a revenue budget. And I understand the funding of it, 3% up or 3% down, but I would think it would be continued to have money going into it until it got to some magic percentage.
That's the operating reserve. We want to maintain 3 months worth of operating cost in a separate reserve. That would be in addition to the revenue stabilization reserve.
So the stabilization, you don't envision that being tied to some type of percent of cost or anything?
No. But the operating reserve account would be the equivalent of 3 months, rolling 3 months worth of operating expenses.
Okay, thank you.
And if I would just want to add one other point to your earlier question, you were asking about potential areas of risk and what we presented. Nick mentioned that we assumed a TIFIA loan, and the federal TIFIA loans have been very popular with MAP 21, and the funding for the TIFIA loan program went up to $1.7 billion. It was a large increase. It really showed the commitment of the federal government to this loan program, which is specific to transportation projects. And it has very advantageous features, not only recently with the interest rate, which has been as low as below 3%, but the terms and conditions, which allow for no interest payments during the loan drawdown period in construction, potentially no interest payments during the first 5 years of operations, and you could have sculpting of the principal over time. It's a 35-year repayment period beginning with substantial completion. So not unlike, say, a bond where it's maybe a 30-year bond is due 30 years after you issue the bond, but the TIFIA loan would be 35 years at the end of construction. So it's a longer term. So those are all advantageous features that are reflected in our finance plan. But of course, there's always the risk that PSTA would be unable to secure a TIFIA loan because it is a competitive program. and there are many applicants around the country that are looking for TIFIA loans, and the U.S. Department of Transportation looks to, at the creditworthiness of the loan application. So we felt comfortable putting the loan in because we felt that this is a project that would benefit from a TIFIA loan, which is something that is one of the criteria that the U.S. DOT looks at in applications, that the senior debt would be investment grade and other requirements. So there are a lot of requirements we felt were that were met here, and we felt confident, given the popularity of the program, that the federal government would continue to fund it. But it's a risk in that if we had to fund the PSTA share 100% with sales tax backed debt, as opposed to what we're now assuming, which is 2/3 sales tax, 1/3 TIFIA, that hurts the financial feasibility, in that you have higher debt costs and terms and conditions aren't as favorable. So it's kind of in the same category as funding of the New Starts program, for example.
So you've got to go 10 years out, you're going to have assumptions in any kind of forecast. Thank you.
Commissioner Just.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Similarly, the Commissioner Steele was mentioning, a good thing is that we did validate our capital costs for the LRT and the bus. We have a brand new consultant working on that, who is also confirmed as another engineer looking at that for those costs, correct, Greg? So your role was to take those validated costs, put them into future dollars, and analyze if the funding source that we will eventually ask the voters for will support the plans that we have on the table. In a nutshell. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. And in doing that, you looked for the best financial strategy. How much of it should be cash? How much should be financed? As you just mentioned, what happens with the up and down revenues? What happens if we don't get the kind of grants that we're looking at? How do we support the system? And in your plan, you're putting those strategies and recommendations into place.
Yeah, and we're still, we're not
still
finished.
working,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But this is the general gist of it.
No, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
with that penny, it's not like a millage rate. You can't just raise it if you need more money. So you have to live within your means.
Right.
And so it's really important to be able to analyze this plan and make sure it fits within that funding source. Because you can't just go back and ask for more easily.
Right.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. In your analysis, what changed? What changes did you end up making, and recommendations did you end up making as a change overall from a delivery standpoint, like delivery of service? Because I know that we have a delivery plan that I'm waiting to see, but I'm assuming it's part of this. Huh?
That's the only pie.
That is a very good segue if there are into the phasing plan. What I wanted to open with, and it is exceptionally good segue into the phasing plan, because I will tell you that the things that have changed over the last few weeks is going back and forth between the bus plan options and how we would phase those in with the financial plan. And so early on in the bus plan, we tried to get as much implemented as quickly as possible. And so we had to temper that a little bit in terms of the rollout through the financial plan. So that's what I would say is the biggest change.
Do you have any more questions related to the financial? She's going to talk about phasing plan.
I think I do.
Okay? Okay.
Certainly, I won't let them leave
No.
for a while.
Anyone have any other
Other
questions
questions
related
about the financial
to
plan?
what we've just seen?
I did have a couple, and I'll be brief. Phasing was one of them, so I'll wait, but I want to agree with Commissioner Seal. I think this is a very good report. I agree with the conservative approach on this issue. Looking at Ronnie Duncan down there. On the 3% that you built in for the sales tax, did you look at other rates of growth, and was there a floor at which this plan did not work? Did you look at other rates of growth for sales tax? In other words, did the plan work at a 2% rate of growth or 1.5%?
We did earlier on, but to be honest, I haven't revisited that since we made a number of other changes and assumptions. So I would, part of our sensitivity analysis, I'll make a note to revisit what that rate would be.
Okay. And when will we have the final report with all of your assumptions and underlying schedules and tables? When will we have that?
Well, we're scheduled to have our deliverables in December. And that includes the looking at a P3 and whether or not that has applicability
Okay.
for the LRT system.
And I'm just making dates. This is going to the commission on December 10th. So again,
Well, don't forget on the 3rd will be at your workshop.
Right.
So you should have to have, it's going to be by the 3rd or before that.
based on your work
Without
now.
talking to them, I think that we could have some interim memoranda, but I'm not sure we have all of the P3 information ready. And so, and I think that's okay. The way that we structured the task work order and the way we talked about it at the PSTA board was we have to know that this program works first and then use the P3 as is this attractive to the private market? And so it would only enhance the program.
Right.
Yes.
What we see now doesn't have that P3 component.
No.
Right, and that would be the major component that they would be working on in November and early December.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mayor Edwards, I understand you have a question.
You had a cash flow requirement slide that had the tax receipt curve pretty steep. I can't see the bus net numbers on here. No, it wasn't that one, it was this one. Yeah, that one. Yep, that one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, you can't see the other numbers on your copy here. So we're going to get this report then?
I think it's on.
We got that.
Online.
We can get this.
Yeah, it just said the gray is not showing.
Okay.
For some reason, it doesn't show up on
Yeah.
Lucas projector as well as it did.
So that right there, you're assuming no other revenue but the tax receipts, is that?
No, we're where we are able to link a source of revenue specifically to the bus program. For example, this is a net cost, so it's your gross operating costs, net of federal formula funds for the bus fares. The only thing that these two net costs don't include are revenues from sales tax, simply because we don't really have a formula to allocate them to either bus or LRT.
And one of the things you said that we were talking about the threats of this, it really comes down to where the funding comes from and the and what the competitive nature of those funds is going to be. If you look back on some of the other systems that are in place out there now, how long of a process did it take? Probably an unfair question because it's so general, but to get to a point where you actually are getting funding that makes this a reality. At some point somebody might say, well, rail's just not going to happen. We're going to have this expanded bus and BRT and all of that. Do you go to the wells 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, and does this have your schedule about 2024 being in play means that we will have applied one time and gotten the funding, or just some general comments?
Any one of us, I think, could answer that question.
You really engage the feds from the onset of the process. So as you're starting your project development and environmental study all the way through design, they stay engaged so they know what to expect. So you're not hitting them out of the blue at one stage late in the process. You engage them early and continue on. So when you're ready for the full funding grant agreement, they're ready as well.
So we're figuring on something like this, obviously, a big part of this plan is federal monies, the rail part anyway.
Correct. And they're going to be involved early on in the process, so they have a sense of scope and can help guide you on what funding will be available, who you're competing against, and how to make it competitive.
So we'll always have a kind of a running feel for being a year off, 2 years off, 5 years off on funding and competitive kind of.
Right, we have already talked to the FTA about this project, run down what we think the project is going to be, what we think it's going to cost, as well as what we think their participation will be. We also understand what pieces we're missing, which is why we're here having this conversation today, is the biggest piece that we're missing is passing a referendum. And so once that referendum passes, our ask to the FTA becomes much more serious, but they know our project is out there. In fact, we have another trip planned to see them very shortly to, again, talk about this project.
So when you're applying for these funds, on let's say 10 cities are applying, how many cities typically are getting funded along the way, right, in any given year? Are we talking 10 applications for rail, or what kind of sense of that is there? My biggest concern is that we're collecting a penny for years and years and years and not being able to access capital funds from the feds to make it a reality. And, how long does that funding build up and that kind of thing? And,
I think what we would do is apply for the New Starts program as quickly as we can. We could apply in the moment that the referendum passes and be considered for that funding source, even though a full funding grant agreement might not come until 2020. So, we could apply on November 5th, 2014, and then ask for it in 2020. So it'll be, we'll be asking year after year, and we will get into the New Starts report year after year with our ratings for the criteria that they set.
And the flow of funds picture will obviously change depending on when those funds actually start kicking in.
Right.
Yeah, but Cassandra, after you complete each phase in the New Starts process, they kind of look at your project and rate it. And that's a decision point for them as to whether or not they want to allow you to move to the next phase.
Right.
So if we have a project that's not going to meet their criteria very well, we'll know that early on, or we'll know what to do to raise its rating the next time it's reviewed by FTA.
But your sense of this project with the 1% sales tax is a pretty good one.
Yeah, I think it's, whenever you can bring a locally dedicated funding source to the table, you have kind of half the battle won with FDA. Because local financial commitment is a huge part of the overall scoring.
To address your cash flow aspect of your question, like here we saw that you're building up cash balances. Potentially the federal and state funds wouldn't come in year by year on, say, one-third basis. It may be that the federal funding lags until the appropriations catch up with actual expenditures. But here you would be well positioned to advance the federal share, as is commonly happens with sales tax revenue, such that your revenue, this black here shaded area, would be larger, which would mean you'd have less cash buildup under this curve, but then you would have lower outflows here as you get reimbursed from federal funds.
Yes, I did, and this could be Brad or this could be Christina or both. When you do a lot of this type of financial modeling for other transportation agencies and other highly intense capital programs. From a transportation perspective, when are most of your clients doing this process?
Well, I've worked personally in Charlotte since 2005. I know that when they were developing their 2030 system plan, Before they went out, they were doing this type of analysis to see what was feasible. But their sales tax went into place, I think, in 1999. And to be honest, that predates my involvement, so I'm not sure if they had this level of detail prior to the referendum or afterwards. I don't know if you want to speak to Miami D or any other.
So are you saying for the most part that most people are doing this after the fact of
Well,
getting their funding source secured?
The projects that I've involved with are certainly doing it after the fact. I can't speak to how soon they might have gone into this prior to advocating for a sales tax.
Yeah, in Miami-Dade County, it at least appeared that they had done this type of analysis just based on the published information before the half-penny sales tax vote occurred several years ago.
They just didn't follow the analysis.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, but
And
that's,
so your deliverable to us also will give us a model that will be in our system that we'll be able to adjust as Commissioner LaPala stated, things will happen.
yes.
And we'll have this model and all of this in our system where we can, if we start to see something spiking up or down, we will be able to adjust the model and it'll give us somewhat of a guideline. And certainly if there's questions, we can call you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully.
Or hire, or give them another contract.
So my point is that, from what I've heard, a lot of folks are doing this later in the game. And we're doing it ahead of time to see what the real deal is, to say, we want to make sure that we can deliver what we're projecting that we can deliver. Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to number 3, which is the phasing plan, and Cassandra's going to walk us through that. And thank you, John. You're doing an excellent job.
Okay, so many of these maps you have seen before, but now we're going to talk about what gets done when. So we've talked a little bit about the what, we've talked a little bit about the how. Here's the when it happens. So as Nick and Rob mentioned, even though we would have a referendum in November of 2014, the sales tax wouldn't be implemented until January of 2016, which means that we also wouldn't see revenues from that until a couple months after that. So we have kept that in mind as we phase out and eliminate the property tax and bring on the sales tax. So in the early years, meaning after the sales tax referendum, the things that we would be able to do starting in November of 2014 to about March of 2016 would be going to that restructured network that we had TMD create for us as far as streamlining, preparing for going from the hub to the grid. We would begin the Safety Harbor Jolly Trolley. Of course, that is happening in early 2014. And we would start to bring online some of the projects as we could. One of our first ones would be that Saturday service on the 100X. So again, taking something that the public has asked for and bringing it up front as best we can. It's really 2016 when we start to see some significant improvements in the bus program. And so we're going to talk a little bit about when those items come online. They would include that increased frequency that we've talked about, as well as a BRT and rapid network. So as we get into 2016, we would try to put those items within our service plan that we could do without a whole fleet expansion. Meaning we're going to start revenues, we're going to start to be able to buy new buses. But without that, we would still be able to add night and weekend service across the system. That's every route from South County all the way up to the connector. So that's every route, nights and weekends. In 2017 is when we'd start to see that fleet increase. and in 2018, bring on a lot of the frequency improvements. And that would be for those frequent local routes, those are the orange routes, as well as all of the trolleys in the system. So we'd bring that frequency, so midday, we would start to go to their maximum frequencies, whether that's 15 minutes in some cases or 30 minutes in others. And we would begin the new regional express services, so build out those green lines and get those in place. In 2019, we would then go to that supporting local, and again, increase the frequencies where we have planned, and increase on the connector, and to begin those new circulator services. So again, nights and weekends very early in the process, and then bringing in the midday frequencies as best we can over the next few years. We would then move on into the capital side of the Rapid Corridor program. We have 6 BRT and Rapid services planned for PSTA's highest routes. And the distinction that we're making between bus rapid transit and rapid services is the right-of-way treatment. There are some areas where we have had the local jurisdiction say to us, we will give you the right-of-way. These are areas where we will use the right-of-way. In areas where we cannot get the right-of-way, we have determined that it is better to do a rapid service. So that means a limited stop service. It would be high frequency and still have that branded feeling of all of the rapid services across the county. We would plan to do 3 almost immediately, and then bring 3 more of those services on later. So you see the 3 that we're talking about bringing in a phase 1. Remember, each one of these corridors is its own unique study. Much as we have done the alternatives analysis and had a big process for the rail, each one of these will have a similar treatment. We'll go through an environment and engineering phase, a construction phase, and opening. So the Central Avenue BRT, 49th Street and East Bay, and Gulf to Bay Boulevard would be in that first set. Each one of these would have 3 separate projects that would begin in 2016, construct and install station stops, whatever we decide those stations are going to look like, and open the service in 2018. Then the next 3, we would bring 1 online each year after that. So again, doing these studies between 2017 and 2019, the capital and installation between 2018 and 2020, and we have 1 open in 19, 1 open in 20, and 1 open in 21. So by the end of fiscal year 2021, the entire bus system program would be built. Again, we've always said from the beginning of this project, the bus will come first, and then we will do the rail. But that does not mean we would have no activity on the rail side. In 2018, we would start the environmental work and the engineering for the light rail. We would expect the vehicles and the construction period to be about 2021, 2023, and that service to open probably late 2023, early 2024. As Rob mentioned, he said 2024. That's part of that is straddling the calendar year and the fiscal year, so that just when it comes to talking with the public about that, if we say 2024, sometimes that means December 2023. And so we'd have to see how those payments worked out, but no later than 2024 would we have that rail open. I think that's it.
Any questions regarding these? Thank you, so with us. Your detail explains a lot.
Yep.
Just real quick.
Mayor?
Yeah, any BRT planned for the light rail corridor at all before the rail gets there and to see?
Yes, that would be the 49th Street and East Bay. So the rail is those would parallel. So that service would also evolve a little bit when the rail came on. That service would evolve to be a little bit different in order to serve the in between the rail stations.
So that 49th Street East Bay, that's the one that goes from Clearwater down to?
Yes, it mirrors the Route 52, which is one of our most crowded routes.
And it's fairly close to the rail alignment, except it goes up 49th and St. Pete instead of the highway.
Johnson?
Is, in your process of determining the service, the layout, the years that you're going to do it, for instance, we'll use BRT as an example, what was your criteria for the choice of the various lines? Was that ridership or potential ridership, or?
We looked at some of our highest productivity routes, and we also looked at what else is going on in the corridor. So, Central Avenue, that's already had a lot of investment, and there is, and we talked to the city about using right-of-way, and they're putting those investments in right now, and especially with the stations and new shelters. 49th Street and East Bay, we've talked about that being the builder for the building block for the rail project. Again, and the Route 52 being one of our most crowded routes, it needs some increases in services today. The other one is the last of the first set, Gulf to Bay, is Route 60 is our highest productivity route. And this also, having it come online in 2018, mirrors, so starts to line up with that regional service and making sure that we're getting from the airport, connection to the airport to the beach, and really leveraging the BRT service with our regional services. So again, it's what's going on in the corridor and what we have out there today.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions regarding the phasing?
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
And that was a great report. I had another question on phasing of the LRT portion. I know we have to go through NEPA and everything else, but is the plan to have all 16 stations up in 2024?
Yes.
Or are we, so there's no phasing for the 16 stations?
No, the only station that I would say is sort of in question would be Toy Town. Because that would be incorporated into a new development. There's
Questions there.
yes, right, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, let's move, so now you have it. Now you have the financials, you know how they want to phase it in. You've asked questions, take it home, read it, talk to your gurus, and be ready in November.
Yes, ma'am, be ready in November for a final decision on this. I will say that over the course of October, we will be taking this information to our committees and to the boards. So you will have other chances to ask questions. I would ask, because we are moving very quickly on this, that if there is something else you want to see, if you have a question, is please ask your questions as early as possible. We'll have this at the planning committee on Wednesday and the board at the end of the month. So the sooner we can get your questions, the sooner we can incorporate it into the financial plan.
I'm sorry, just one other question. You start talking like this, and it's like, get on board, or you're not going to, you better.
Well, it's not,
No, I'm not
I
saying.
just want to know what your questions are.
It's all coming. It's all coming pretty quickly. So one of the questions that I keep hearing about is, that until you know that you're going to get rail, if you have kept property taxes and then had a half a penny, it's probably all you would need for the expanded bus service, et cetera. Then I've heard some folks saying that that penny is going to be needed for other things early on. And I was wondering if there was any comments from the financial folks about that. About a half a penny in property tax, which brings in a lot less money than a full penny, and how that would accommodate our expanded system until you find out that you get rail. Just a question.
And we didn't look at that specifically.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, we do have one more question for the financial people, and that's from Commissioner.
Well, and I had a similar question, Mayor. Your assumptions to the financial folks was a full penny for LRT and BRT, no trails, anything else. That was your assumption. That's what all this work was based on. And I guess when this comes to the commission, that's one of the questions our attorney is going to want to hear from the Board of County Commissioners. And, you know, since we've been talking about the AA, it's always been a full penny. So I'm not sure that we've ever, since we got the AA recommendations, talked about a 0.5% or anything else. So my understanding is what the commission is going to talk about is authorizing the full penny for LRT and for bus expansion, bus operations and expansion. So I just put that on the table.
Okay.
And I think that's a great point, Commissioner. And I'm not sure we can all, any of us can look forward and know for sure what's going to happen. But the idea was that the county could start, you know, crawling and walking and then running. But we're funding this thing as though we're running from day one. And so the questions that I've been hearing about are that if you have the full property tax and a 0.5 penny, you don't get as much. You get about 3/4, and again, these are just rough numbers I've heard. And that you could do the expanded system, you could do the BRT, you could do all of it and see if it takes hold while you're applying for these outside rail money. But I just was wondering, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, if I could, Madam Chair. I understand your position on that, you mentioned that several times, but none of the plans that PSTA or ACPT have talked about use that model. It's all using a full penny and doing away with the ad valorem.
No, I understand. I'm just saying, this is what, you know, these are the things that we're hearing about, and this is what people are concerned about, is giving monies. And if it doesn't happen, then what are you going to do? What's your exit strategy with the money that you've accumulated over the years and perhaps a decade? And so it was just a thought that maybe you'd step into it as opposed to jumping into it before it would come through. And so we're all in, as they say. We're all in with the penny, and it's that or bust. So just understand that that's what I've been hearing a lot of. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions with Brett?
Just on that point, and I know from a numbers point of view, that comment, and I remember hearing that myself. You know, the sales tax is estimated to be generating about 130 million, and the property tax goes away at about 32. So it's like net 100. Half of 130 is 65. Plus the 30 ad valorem, you're almost at 100. It's about the same amount of money.
100 is the same as 130, is what you're saying?
No, the net revenue under the proposal that you just said.
Oh, I see, okay.
Keeping the PSTA ad valorem plus 0.5 cent is net the same amount of dollars.
So there is no difference.
There's no difference, so then it becomes a question of sort of like what, it's not an Ernst & Young kind of question, it's a political question about the vote.
And that's what I was asking, because the number, what I've been heard and was assuming, you're telling me is incorrect. That's why I asked the question. The amount, the total money, there's some numbers that we assumed, and that's why the property tax, I understood those numbers, is make a giant difference. Net out the property tax.
Okay, we're moving on. Sandra, are we ready?
We're ready.
Good. Now we're going to talk about transportation and land use supports for transit system.
So you have in front of you, Commissioner Crozier likes to call the baby book. It is here. It is there in full color. Jacobs has done a tremendous job of putting this together and not dealing with just the MPO and all their comments, but with PSTA and all their comments. So we have been through this quite extensively. You've seen a lot of the photos and the renderings and things that are in here already through Scott's presentations. And so I didn't intend to give a very long discussion about this other than to say, please take it home, enjoy it, you know, show it to people, brag, whatever you need to do. And this is really the start of our discussion of the implications of putting together this kind of transit program and the effect that it has on our community, economic development, and the land use, and how all these pieces fit together. And this is not a single person's story. This is all of us together, which is why we have Mike Crawford to give a presentation about the PPC's role in making sure that the land use across the county is tied to that transportation investment. And then Carol Strickland to talk about the local government role of what they're doing to move this forward in terms of implementation. And so if there are no specific questions about the work that we've done, the charrettes that we've had, the community involvement that we've put out there in order to get this baby book, this 16 stations done, I'll turn it over to Mike Crawford to talk about the countywide PPC plan.
Is this linkable? Where is this document?
This is on the MPO website and is also on the Greenlight website, and it'll also be part of this package and be on the internet under this meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Right? Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Michael Crawford, the Pinellas Planning Council Interim Executive Director. And in a moment, we'll show you an informational brochure approved by the council last Wednesday. But in the meantime, I want to run through a slideshow that will help to clarify some things between Greenlight Pinellas and the effort that we have, which is a parallel effort to update our countywide plan. Last month here at the ACPT, you heard me comment about some possible confusion between the part of the Greenlight Pinellas and the countywide plan effort. Also in September and October at the PPC meeting, the council discussed some points of confusion as well. So we put together some information after what you've just seen. This is rather simplified. It may be oversimplified, and it may be common knowledge for some of you, but we didn't want to assume that. So what we thought we'd do is just run through how Greenlight Pinellas compares with the updated countywide plan and basically how we are coordinating the two. Again, this is simplistic, and the three main components with Greenlight Pinellas start with the first of the service plans, the two service plans being rail and bus, but starts with bus. And this is, of course, PSTA's community bus plan based on the original new revenue scenario. The second part is rail, the locally preferred alternative, which was the step that followed the alternatives analysis, of course. And this also was based on the new revenue scenario. And the land use portion, which is the transit station design concepts, and it was for rail stations only, and it's based on the design charrettes or the baby book. We thought that some of the confusion came from the term land use, and we really think that it's station design concepts. We talked about that with staff here. We talked about that last month as well, and that's what it really is. When it relates to the Greenlight Pinellas relates to the countywide plan, what we've done is we've taken the bus system or the network that you have in your bus plan, the core, the frequent, and supporting local on the vision map, and we are bringing that over to the updated countywide plan, and those will be our corridor categories. We've got 4 categories at present that I'll show you in a moment that are on the vision map. Right now the terms are primary, premium, primary, secondary, and supporting corridors. We're still working on those terms as well. The next part is rail and the station design concepts. These come on our vision map as transit station areas. Now, these would be considered on the map, they're called proposed station areas, and we've already adopted, in 2010, we've already adopted the transportation-oriented development category into the countywide rules in anticipation of this. The next step is to put it on the vision map. And the last part that I wanted to talk about, which again was the station design concepts, this was just about what Cassandra talked about, which is the transit station design. This is just an example of the Largo Town Center, the Cloud Station, and we would like to show how this relates to our transit-oriented land use vision map. You have the station design concepts in the circle there. Again, that's an example of one of the 16 that would go in throughout the corridor, the locally preferred alternative corridor. The next step would be developing local model zoning codes with Clearwater, Largo, Pinellas County, Pinellas Park, and St. Petersburg. Those are the 5 communities. Those are the only 5 communities in the county, of course, that have the potential for stations. And then what our vision map would do would be to tie in all of this on a grander scale, on a land use scale, to allow for both the local model zoning codes, and then as it gets down to the station design, to allow that to occur as well. Without the changes on the countywide map, and to the vision map, and to the countywide future land use plan map, these higher level of densities and intensities in these, mostly in these newer areas, would not be able to occur. So again, we've got the countywide rules have already been put in place to accept the transit-oriented design standards. Now we're putting it on the map. We're looking at sometime in the spring of 2014 to have this adopted. And this is in a brochure that I'm going to talk about in just a second. This is really one of the slides that we've used that ties the transit stationary design to our vision map. And we've only pointed out 4 of these, but you see where they tie in to the white circles to where those are 4 of the 16 stations. But again, this was a real quick rundown. We did this with the Pinellas Planning Council, hopefully just to clarify how our parallel process works within or coordinates with Greenlight Pinellas. And I would be glad to answer any questions to clarify any more of this. And if there aren't any, I can move into our brochure. Okay, so and what we did here with the brochure was answer your question or answer your request. And that was the ACPT requested that the PPC would produce a companion brochure describing the current countywide plan update in light of its important supporting role for countywide transit planning. So on Wednesday, the council approved this brochure, the brochure that's in your agenda package, and it's intended to illustrate the major concepts in the updated countywide plan that have been agreed upon so far. Again, like I said, we'll be approving this sometime in the spring. We're working these concepts through at this point, and so they are in draft form. So we put together this brochure, and this would be available for the public, for you all, for anyone that would like to know how, again, our parallel process with updating the countywide plan connects with transit. So on the second page, we discuss how land use and transportation are connected. We go through a little bit of detail about basically how we have primarily a suburban layout, except with the exception of a few places in Pinellas County, but primarily suburban layout, and that's just fine with some people, but it is very car-oriented. And we discussed the need for an alternative, that is, in appropriate places to allow for compact development, mixed uses, and interconnected streets, allowing for better pedestrian, bicycling, and transit use. At the same time, and we emphasize this almost all the time, is there are remaining parts of Pinellas County that will remain suburban or even more rural in nature on what we're talking about. So we're talking about corridors and activity centers, and the remaining areas that we call the stable neighborhoods and what have you would remain just that. On this next page of our brochure, we like to talk about what kinds of land use support transit. Again, that's transit-oriented development, or TOD. We hear that all the time. It's development that's different from the suburban style neighborhoods and commercial areas that most of us are used to. I say most of us because, again, there's a couple of places in Pinellas County that are pretty urban. It's found in relatively compact areas, typically about a half a mile from the rail and bus transit stations, about a quarter mile from corridors. And we call these areas on the countywide plan and the vision map activity centers. Some are existing, some are proposed, and multimodal corridors. These are areas that are designed for convenient walking, bicycling, and transit use, and have a mix of uses with an emphasis on employment and mixed uses as well. The fourth page that we have is transit-oriented land use, and the vision map discuss. This is really the key of how Greenlight Pinellas and the updated countywide plan work together. We explain our efforts and how they complement Greenlight Pinellas, which is on the left. That is your whole Greenlight Pinellas plan that you just saw that Cassandra had up on the screen. And on the right is our transit-oriented land use and vision map. And these really, they aren't exactly the same because on the right, the vision map, these are the areas that we have pulled off of the map on the left and have a land use implication. There are some of the areas on the left that we don't think at this point will have a land use implication. That is that we will not be encouraging different types of uses or higher densities and intensities along some of those areas. But the ones on the right are ones where we would expect it. You've got bus rapid transit, you've got rapid transit, you've got core networks, you've got a number of activity centers as well. Again, we pulled off the proposed light rail, parts of all of the core network, and some of the other corridors as well. And then on the 5th page, we just explained a little bit here our activity centers and our multimodal centers. We're still working on some of the terminology so that we don't conflict with some of the things that you all are working with your bus technology. But again, it's where we would be concentrating future growth in the activity centers and the multimodal corridors. We're trying to get that across in this slide here. More repeat of the light rail development concepts. Again, explains how we tie in the light rail concepts with what we're doing with updated countywide plan. And on page 7, just a little bit more detail in our update. It's not just our vision map. We have an entire map of every parcel from Tarpon Springs to St. Petersburg, Largo to Indian Rocks Beach that will be simplified. We were talking about 11 categories at present, in addition to the activity centers and the multimodal corridors. We explain in this part of the brochure here that the changes will help to maintain countywide goals such as the preservation of the stable neighborhoods I talked about a moment ago, job creation, protection of environmental resources, and most importantly, the new countywide plan will be better coordinated with with planning for all the types of transportation that is going on with the PSTA and Greenlight Pinellas. And then lastly, we talk about how it might benefit some of the communities around Pinellas County, preserving and enhancing high quality of life that we have in Pinellas County, concentrating growth and increasing our economic competitiveness. Of course, working with promoting walking and bicycling to support the transit network as well. And that we state lastly that these new centers and corridors will provide for more transportation and lifestyle options, again alternatives, keeping the county attractive to business, workers, visitors, and serves as a place of special value for the community. So the council, again, developed this brochure and offers it to as a companion for whatever you think it might be needed with Greenlight Pinellas, and be made available to anyone who might want to just find out a little bit more about what we're doing. Again, we're in the middle of developing the rest of these concepts. We'll make some adjustments as we see new information come out. The details, the written details, we'll be working on right after the first of the year with the council. And again, we expect to have our updated countywide plan completed sometime in the spring of 2014. So hopefully this is helpful. This is what we think you asked for, and it'll be available on our website and linked to yours, I'm sure, as well as paper copies we have today.
And I'd just like to thank Michael and his whole staff for putting this together. And I think in many ways it really simplifies it from the point of view of density and mass transit working together while also protecting the stabilized neighborhoods. And and the other thing that he made sound pretty simple, we went from 34 categories to 11?
38.
38 to 11. So
That's awesome.
the colors still confuse me, but that's less.
We're trying.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, agreed.
Good job.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on, the local transit supportive land use planning efforts. And Ms. Carol Strickland from the City of Largo is going to talk about her committee and their work.
Thank you. I just wanted to report to you what's going on at the local level, which is, I assure you, where the action is. Kind of looking schematically at this, the infrastructure for transit is Greenlight Pinellas. Then there's the transit supportive county and city land use policies. And then the third leg of the stool is the private sector and the investment that comes with that. Greenlight Pinellas is really an economic development proposition. And when we talk to our citizens in Largo, they're very interested in that proposition, the jobs, the housing, and the retail development that would result from a change in the type of transit service we provide. At the same time, if you provide that land use, it ensures the success of the transit system because you create ridership through transit-oriented development. So the work that we're doing in concert with the countywide plan update is really starting to look at what we need to do at the local level with our comprehensive plan to create the mix of land uses and the densities and intensities, those entitlements on the ground that will attract that type of development, and then looking at our local zoning codes, land development regulations, to put the right style of development in place that you see illustrated in the baby book. How do you get that urban form that's walkable, that's oriented around transit? We're focused in the baby book on light rail stations, but we do understand that it also does very much apply to your high-frequency bus corridors and your BRT corridors. So even though we think about the station area planning, we're also looking at what happens in those corridors. And then I guess the final piece that I mentioned was the private investment, and you heard in the presentation from Ernst & Young talking about consideration of P3, public-private partnerships, and what that means. And as at the local level, we do the station area planning. Where does the parking go? Is it mixed in with a private office building or other mixed-use development? How do we form those financial partnerships with the private sector to produce real transit-oriented development? So we're looking at that in Largo, but what we're also planning to do is to partner with the other cities in Pinellas County to kind of form a working committee where we will coordinate our efforts so that when the Federal Transit Administration looks at Pinellas County and says, have you done the work to be ready for light rail that we can fund, they'll be looking at Pinellas County and not looking at individual jurisdictions, and know that we have a unified approach that's reflected in the countywide plan and that's reflected in each of our plans and our land development regulations. And so as the referendum gets placed on the ballot, hopefully, and we hear a response from the voters, we would be doing that coordination at the local level to take the countywide plan update, put it into our local plans, and put it into our land development regulations. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think all of this shows that we're all working together to put a great foundation of transit throughout all of Pinellas. And I commend everyone, and especially our new financial partners, for all the hard work everybody's put into it and continue to put into it. So I think it should hopefully show not only to our county commission, but to the residents of Pinellas County that everybody's working on this to make it a great foundation to build off of. Because it dawned on me after a couple other meetings that once we put this in plan, we have thought about it, we've worked it, we've laid it out. And the reason I use the word foundation is because 20, 30 years from now, even though we're moving forward, what happens is that next generation can take it and even take it further. So I thank all of you for everything you're doing so far. The next thing I want to just mention is, you all know when we were presented with the green light plan and we all went, wow, that seems like a long time ago. We finally got to the point where we had analyzed a lot. We had added 2 other committees, the business and the civic group, and then we brought it down to the council, which I want to give just a brief update. Our buddy here, Jeff, was the chairman. We met on September 25th. I'm very proud to say that the chairman of the business committee was Mr. Duncan, and he's here today, probably to hear more, excuse me, the financials, so he can continue to go back to his committee. I'll briefly tell you a little bit about what they did. And we have Stacy Blake at the end, who was the chairman of the Civic Committee, and what they discussed. So, and I was wowed by what I heard these various committees, because we didn't give direction. They got their information, they asked the questions they needed to ask, they got answers, and then they took it and they worked it within what they felt their committee was supposed to do. And I think that was wonderful. The business committee, and correct me if you need to say more, Ronnie, their members, after they, and I'm sure the business community really asked some tough questions about the green light to PSTA and got their answers, but their biggest thing was the discussion of the business and how can they help. And in their discussion, they came out with, maybe we need to have another outside entity, am I correct? Looking at our financial assumptions. And that's the role that they took. And in having that discussion and having PSTA and our gurus sitting around the table, that's how that all came about. And I think it was an excellent idea to come on and came about, and they would like to continue to discuss the financial plan, and the group really liked working together and would like to be able to do more if they can along those lines. Because they realize when you have a business, you got to have a business plan. Right? This is going to be eventually some kind of a PSTA business, and they're hoping that everything's in place. The civic group, on the other hand, was a conglomerate of mixed ages, mixed backgrounds, and they started, of course, wanting to know everything about the plan. But once they started looking into it, they said, we got some people that say, yeah, I like it. No, I don't like it. Well, let's bring those, no, I don't like it, to the table, just to ask them, why don't you? What would you like us to change? How can we make it better? So they invited that, or the groups that they knew had a negativity towards the plan, come and sit at the table so they could hear those concerns. And the reason they wanted to, because they want to continue with the education and messaging of what Greenlight is all about. So they wanted to know both, so they could put it together and help. So they want to continue along that role, and whatever they can do to help in that area. Well, then I talked about us, what all we've done. You guys already know that. And I also gave them a little bit of background. We didn't just start off as this. We started with the AA. Actually, some of us were on the PMI, the Mobility Commission, a long time ago, but how it has evolved, which helped them understand, too, what we have been talking about. The one thing that really came out of the committee, and that was we supported the green light vision. And the council said that we agree with the green light Pinellas vision. We believe that PSTA has performed its due diligence and completed strong technical work while responding to concerns of the constituents it serves. And I'm going to tell you, if you went to the very, very first meeting PSTA had to decide whether they even wanted to give us the opportunity to analyze and critique everything, if you listen to those people, they were more than 100. Everything they said, we wish we had this, we wish. Brad and his team, the community bus plan addresses all of that, and then some. So I think that's a great statement we had to make. The other is willing to continue reaching out to our prospective groups to educate our communities about the green light Pinellas. And I think each one of us sit on various committees. We keep talking about it, letting them know where we are. And last, we believe that the citizens of Pinellas County should be heard through a referendum vote on November 14th. The committee is going to get together on November 6th, and if you look at your agenda, we meet first, and then 2 days later, this committee's going to get together, meet, hear what everything has been said, the financials, find out more about it, and see where we go from there. And we're also going to be looking at if there's any referendum language, or possibly how our committee would take it to the Board of County Commissioners. We are going to, I believe, have that also on the agenda to discuss. So we'll have a pretty robust meeting at that point. I do want to...
What was the date of that?
November 6th.
Okay.
I do want to say that I thank our chairmans for being here. I don't know if some of your members are also here. I'm getting a from Stacy. And I know you guys got to run business, so I understand that. But it was very good, and I think it's all falling into place. And that's why we said, wow, the steps that we have taken, that Greenlight has laid out for us, Tucker Hall, is all starting to fall into place. And so it was a good meeting, and we're going to move on with it. The next, if you could, on the back, here's all the different dates, November, and hey, it's going to be good. We'll have time for turkey in the end. But November 4th, we meet here again and go over your, by the way, the minutes are in here if you want to look at them and have them ready for the next time. But go over things, and if you don't understand anything that was done on the financials, call Brad, call Cassandra, and they will help you understand or get questions answered. And Mayor, feel free to also do that. Then we're going to have our, oops, remember? I flipped it over. Oh, I'm wrong. Then the 6th will be the Greenlight Council. The 13th is the MPO PTC Board. These are endorsements. The PSTA, the big one, on the 20th. You're not going to meet on the 20th?
No, I said, you said MPO PPC board endorsements, and I said we hope. We're going to be asking.
On all of them, okay, but I'm just giving you the dates.
No,
And then the 20th, and then we will be at a workshop if everything works out okay on the 3rd, and then on the 10th will be the final presentation that we will be giving to the Board of County Commissioners. We'll take it from there, it'll all be theirs, they'll have a big package. And are there any other questions? I know we've gone a little bit late, I think this is great. Jeff, sorry.
On the ballot language, is that something that's the responsibility of this committee, or is that someone else's? Because I haven't seen anything along those lines, and specifically the option of the public-private coordination within the ballot language, so just...
I don't know what's in there. Brad, because I'm thinking it's counties, and we keep saying we're going to talk about it, but I don't know who's, I would assume the county's the writer of it, and all this information is going to be passed to them so that they have information in order to write one, and I had asked for somebody to intercede. So
Well, that's part of some of the questions the county attorney had. And so Jim will be speaking more with Alan and Brad in the coming days, but that is what the October 29th work session will cover, those kinds of issues.
Okay.
So it's October 29th, not November 29th.
And it really should begin with...
And they're already talking about language and some issues about what should or shouldn't be.
I just want to make sure somebody's doing that, because
They're on it.
it's been on our kind of checklist, but I don't think we've really devoted much of our energies towards that.
Correct, correct. Any other last minute questions?
Just Madam Chair, just to let you all know, talk about the partners endorsing the Green Light Plan. We've already did that at our last meeting, it's in your packet. We just did it from a timing perspective.
Oh, okay, all right, great. That's
So it's in your
wonderful.
packet.
Good. Anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, we will adjourn. Thank you.